director for the Center of Politics and Public Affairs at Franklin Marshall College, and he will lend us some insight. As you can imagine, Dr. Madonna is about to become even busier than his normal hectic, crazy schedule, and we do appreciate his taking time to visit with our club. Dr. Madonna will attempt to make some sense of the trends we are seeing reflected in the media and in his polls for the 2016 election cycle, and help us better understand where our state and federal government are leading us in this most interesting election year. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please warmly welcome Dr. Terry Madonna.
First of all, let me thank you for the invitation. Now, in order to do justice to this introduction, I will have to give you 3 credits, and you have to show up for 45 hours of instruction at F&M, because believe me, this is the most inexplicable, unpredictable presidential election in perhaps American history. I spent about 25 years teaching presidential history, and this is the likes of which, I'll move that away a bit, we have not seen. So let me start with the national picture. We'll talk a little bit about the U.S. Senate race here, and we can go elsewhere if you want. First of all, here's what we have to explain. How does Donald Trump, never saw in office before, a showman, an entrepreneur, a guy who's most famous for Americans for being on a reality TV show, win 13 million votes? How does another guy, but this person in the other party, a guy named Bernie Sanders, who's not even a member of the party he's seeking the nomination of, get 12 million votes? Together, the two of these candidates, the two of them, secured 25 million votes throughout the primary process, the likes of which we've not seen in modern history. And if you think about it, Bernie Sanders only wants to spend about $35 trillion, of which he will tax the 1%, which covers about half of it, leaving $18 trillion to add to the $18 trillion debt, and that's okay. And about 25% of his supporters say socialism, that's no problem. So when you think about it, something has to explain the oddity of these elections, and we'll be writing about them. By the elections, I mean the Democratic and the Republican nomination process. We'll be thinking and writing about these for decades. But let me start out with, in a sense, trying to understand how that could happen. And we can look at Trump, and those of you who don't like him, that's fine. A lot of Americans don't like him. By the way, they don't like Hillary either. I'll get back to that in a moment. The fact of the matter is that we produced this. We, the American people, produced this. And let me go and tell you why. We have seen record levels of distrust in government in the polls, dissatisfaction with government, a distaste for government, from both the right and the left. Now, on the right side, it has to do with the fact that Republicans in 2010 and 2014 won midterm elections with sweeping numbers. Right now, the Republicans in the House of Representatives in Congress have 247 members. The last time that party had 247 members, Herbert Hoover was president of the United States. But it's the qualitative difference that also matters. The members who got elected in 2010 and 2014 on the Republican side were elected with a mission. Cut down the size of government, reduce regulations, get rid of government debt, and get the government out of the lives of people. So 2010 and 2016, what's happened? So the angst and the anger and the distrust that some voters have on the Republican side especially is aimed not just at government but at their own party. Their own party leaders. What Trump had to do to win the nomination was only get rid of 16 other people. And not arguably, the field was pretty strong. Senators, ex-senators, governors, ex-governors. I mean, you can't argue, unlike on the other side of the aisle, Hillary Clinton only had to dispatch really Bernie Sanders. Who were those other people? Can any of you tell me? O'Malley and 2 other guys. They didn't make a dent because she was certainly going to be the nominee. She was the establishment candidate of the Democratic Party. That nomination was wrapped up. It took her until June to basically get Sanders to stop running, and yesterday until we formally endorsed her. So the way to think of this race is this. The American people are angrier and have more distrust and distaste and disdain for government than at any time in modern history. That's point number 1. Took me a while to make that, didn't it? Let's go to point number 2. In years gone by, we'll play a little game. I get to decide this, I'm the professor. You're the Republicans, and you're the Democrats, and this 3 tables, you're the middle. So let's go over here on the Republican side. 20 or 30 years ago, there were far fewer of you Republicans who called yourselves conservative. But even more important, today, many more of you describe yourselves as very conservative. Those of you in the back, the very conservatives, you got it? More and more, Democrats can laugh. More of you Democrats call yourselves liberal than you did 20, 30 years ago. And more of you now call yourselves very liberal. So what we have seen in our country is the increasing polarization of us, the voters, rigidly locked into positions around which there's no give and take. Why? There's no give and take. Oh, wait a minute. You know what you think of those people? You don't want to marry them, I'll tell you that. But let's go one step further. You have a 70% plus rate of viewing them as unfavorable. And by the way, it's not just that you don't like their policies. You think if they win, the nation is gone. Literally, we would see the destruction of the republic. Similarly, more than 70% of you feel the same way about them. So you are stuck in the middle. There are fewer and fewer of you, and you may matter in some states. We can talk about that in determining elections. But where's the compromise? You're the compromisers. Far more of them aren't going to compromise anymore because of the attitude they have towards the people in the other party. And by the way, the people who are active in politics feel those sentiments more strongly than the people who are not active. So the higher you go in the political food chain, the more likely people are to hold rigid ideological positions. As a pollster for 25 years and someone who reads polls religiously, I have to search for something that Republicans and Democrats agree on. I mean, I literally have to go out of my medical marijuana, okay. I get it. I get it. And in some cases, prison reform for very different reasons. But if you look at the foreign policy pursued by the president, Venus and Mars, if you look at domestic policy, whether it's keep the Affordable Care Act, I can go through, I don't have time. I can go through almost every issue, Venus and Mars. Never the middle shall meet this waning, small little group here. And crossing the aisle is now seen as the biggest heresy you could achieve. And that's basically, this gridlock has dominated our government for the better part of a decade. And it's only growing worse. Now let's go to another feature of this. When pollsters ask you Democrats over here, are you voting against Trump or for your own candidate, Hillary Clinton? More than 50% of you say, I'm voting against him more than I'm voting for Hillary. You're in the same situation. Are you voting for Trump or voting against Hillary? No, you're not voting for Trump. More than half of you are saying, I'm voting for Trump, voting for him, but because I dislike the other candidate. We have not seen numbers over 50% in modern history. So much is this campaign motivated on the hostility that voters have towards the other party's candidates. You know, we could throw in some of the people who ran in the primary. So that's point number 3. Let's go to another point. Throughout modern American history, since polls, we've been able to look at, and this was referenced a moment ago, we've been able to look at the popularity of people running for office. You may not believe this, but the voters actually do want to like the people they vote for. I know that may come as a big surprise. In addition to wanting to support what they stand for, they actually do want to like them. And in this case, we have two candidates for the first time in modern history that are more unpopular than popular. Hillary Clinton is 15 points underwater in terms of her favorabilities, meaning 15% more unfavorable than favorable. You Trump supporters, he's only 27% unfavorable. So the voters this year are going to have to look at these candidates not so much because they're enamored with them, but because they don't want the other candidate to win, and who's more unpopular may make a huge difference in the end. So you can begin to see why, let's take Trump first. Trump, he has said some of the most outrageous things imaginable. I mean, I won't even get into crooked Hillary. I mean, we can go through this whole list of things that you would never hear out of a candidate's mouth. Poor Howard Dean in 2004 only let out a scream. And he had to get out of the race after coming in fourth in the Iowa caucus. I'm sitting at home watching this on TV. I thought it was funny. I didn't think anything up. Next day, you know, the press comes, this is unpresidential. And in one speech, Hillary this year ended up barking like a dog. How do you explain it? So the reason this is, I mean, if you look at Trump, and let's take just Trump for a minute, here's what happened spatially. Last June, when Donald Trump announced, people thought, oh man, this is a joke. Look at all the things in his background again. I don't have time to get into it. So by October, 1/3 of the Republicans supported him. 16 other people, 1/3 supported him. And here's the difference in their support. That 1/3 did not care what he said. They didn't care if he made a racist comment now and then, if he made a sexist comment now and then, that he was homophobic. They didn't care. They didn't care that no one could figure out, is he for abortion or against abortion? Is he for gay? Who knows? What were his positions? Can anybody tell me? His supporters don't care because he was doing something that they wanted done. And here's what it was. Take your finger and stick it in the eye of the establishment. What else? Polls. He was telling it like it is. In other words, he was saying what large numbers of Americans felt. And in a sense, not just Republicans. I'll get to the Democrats in a minute. So Trump's base of support comes from people who believe, in many respects, that time has passed them by. That this is not the great America, whether we're talking about foreign policy and how we deal with ISIS, or whether we're talking about domestic policy with the spending, and they see America coming unglued with immigration, illegal immigration, and no consistent policies on that. And so Trump became the beneficiary of that angst and anger and distrust that so many Americans have. And he happened to fit this master showman. And the press aided and abetted by covering everything he did nonstop. He's the only candidate I know who gave an hour and 20-minute speech, say nothing, and the cable shows showed all hour and 20 minutes, but yet Marco Rubio gives a speech and they pick up 5 minutes. And he disproportionately dominated the media coverage, spent almost no money, something that none of us thought could happen, going through the whole primary and caucus process. Had no organization, by the way, to speak of. Couldn't keep a campaign manager for more than a day. Constantly reshuffling his staff. None of that seemed to matter because of this peculiar time that we happen to live in. None of the other 16 candidates could mount a challenge to that 1/3. Guys like me who do this for a living thought, oh my gosh, somebody would get out of the race. Rubio, oh man, Kasich is going to benefit from that. No, every time somebody get out, the support evened itself out among the supporters of the candidate who got out, and no one could pick up a number to seriously challenge Trump. So literally, he became the last man standing. Now, on the other side of the aisle, we have exactly the opposite. The 12 million voters who supported Bernie Sanders supported him because they didn't think government does enough. They didn't think government was big enough. They didn't think government spends enough. They didn't think government overreaches enough. And by and large, all the positions that he took were consistent with their goal of expanding the role of government. And Hillary was trapped being the establishment candidate on the Democratic side. She represented the moderate, the liberal wing of the party, who had been, much more aggressive in foreign policy, much more tied to Wall Street, much more tied to establishment politicians. And as a result of that, Sanders was able, and here's another irony, that the 74-year-old dude overwhelmingly won the millennials, the 18 to 29-year-olds. I want you to think about that for a moment. The candidate of change, the candidate of moving the country forward, whatever that happened to mean. And Hillary was trapped into being the establishment candidate, as were the other conventional Republicans who ran, in a year in which the voters, right and left, want something very different out of a candidate. Now, this is a 5 or 10 minute little analysis and something that takes a lot longer to explain, but we get to go to the heart of it by looking at that. And so, as we move forward, here's what we know right now. As we sit here right now, Clinton has about a 4.5 percentage point lead on the average of the polls that have been done. Last week was not her best week, to put it bluntly. I think everybody, not because she didn't get indicted, but because she was careless and reckless, at least, according to the FBI director. So what's the point here? The point is this. Believe it or not, when it's all said and done, this race, only about a 4.5% difference. The last 5 polls that were out, Trump actually leads in 2 of them. He didn't lead in 50 polls, going back to his bad 3 weeks a month ago. But the lead that Hillary has is not substantial, given what we think could happen. Let's go to another element. We don't elect people through national polls. If you don't believe me, ask President Gore. National polls don't mean anything. You can win by 500,000 and still lose. That's how Gore proved. And a bunch of several other presidents before him. So the point is, we elect people state by state. And as we sit here now, there are probably 8 to 10 states that are going to decide the presidential election. If we look at those states, we look at them, virtually every one has the race within 5 percentage points. I'm talking about Florida, Ohio, our state, Missouri, New Hampshire. By the way, now Georgia, historically a Republican state, now Hillary leads in that state. It's very narrow, largely because of the growth in the African American community. So we yet still have a long way to go in this election. But let's take a look at history and see what we know. And I'll do this just for a minute or two. The Democrats have won 18 states for the past 6 presidential elections, including ours. 18. For 242 electoral votes out of the 270. If you throw in D.C., that's 3 more, you're up to 245. So you can do it 45 to 55 to 65 to 70, 20, you get it? So of the states that matter, if modern history holds true, and the structural nature of the Electoral College holds true, the Democrats are better positioned to win. Now, that's always been the case where the Electoral College, state by state, has favored one party or the other most of the time. Back in the 70s and 80s, it favored the Republicans. The Republicans won 5 of 6 presidential elections with one exception in there, a guy named Jimmy Carter, who served 1 term. Nixon won twice, Carter wins, Reagan wins twice, and Bush 41 succeeds him. Bush the elder succeeds him. Why? Well, the Democrats were losing states in the north that we now take for granted, like New York. Vermont, states that are Democratic were still Republican, and what was going on in the South? The South was moving away from the Democrats to the Republicans, and that gave the Republicans, the Electoral College advantage. But now that's reversed. So in order for Trump to win, he either has to shake up the Electoral College map. Can you believe he's going to win New York? Illinois? Vermont? You see where I'm heading with this? California? Washington? Oregon? I don't think so. Or he's going to have to do disproportionately well among the following states: Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Missouri, Virginia, Georgia, Colorado, and New Mexico. Didn't I impress you that I could name all those? And because these are the states, if historically over the last 6 elections we can look are likely to decide the election. What we don't know is whether or not the map is all shook up because of the nature of this election. Again, battleground states are reasonably close. And the models that get put out, there are statisticians and pollsters who do these models. If you're interested, you can get several of the models get reported on the 538 blog. That's written by a guy named, edited by a guy named Nate Silver. He does a lot of sports stuff now with ESPN. Every one of the models shows Hillary winning. I'm not predicting this, I'm merely saying 80% likelihood. About 79% winning our state. She has likelihood of carrying our state, 20 electoral votes. So we'll have to wait and see, but this is the most unpredictable, uncharted election in modern history. We have 2 conventions to go, and historically, in modern times, the last convention that mattered was 1968, when the Democrats were torn apart over the Vietnam War. There were demonstrations in Chicago, Lincoln Park, and other places in the city. Inside the hall, it was a mess, and it turned the election on its head. Richard Nixon, who lost to Kennedy in 1960 and couldn't even win the governorship of his own state, everybody thought his career was over, won the presidential election over Hubert Humphrey. And that after that time, the conventions have really not made a big difference. But as you watch them next week, start on Monday, here's what to think about. Every convention since then is made for one purpose. It's devoted to one person. How many different ways can you spell television? It's all about made for TV, well scripted. Every sentence, every word, it's all about the television audience and putting a positive message on what goes on. Can anyone sit here with certainty and say that will be true in Cleveland? Then there's a possibility outside the convention it could even be brutal. We'll find out. The Democrats seem more likely now with Bernie on board to have a more conventional convention, meaning well scripted, well planned out, well timed. 24 million Americans watched the conventions 4 years ago. The speech that the nominee gives accepting the nomination, Obama had about 35 million, Romney had about 30 million. The television time is much more limited than it used to be because there's nothing to televise except scripted speeches that everybody can read. But what we don't know is whether something that does happen at these conventions will really affect the outcome of the election. Typically at a convention, the candidates get what we call bounce. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points, the bounce. Because they're positive, they're scripted for TV. The bounce goes away in a couple weeks. And the bounces haven't really affected the outcome. The other big moment, and who knows, we could have a moment any day in this campaign that we can't predict, will be the 3 debates. 3 debates. And does anyone believe that any timing or any rules will follow Trump? Trump will actually listen to any rules? We're all going to be, I think there'll be I don't think there's any doubt about the folks watching the debates. And then the other aspect of it, it's not totally important yet, is that there are at least one candidate, the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson, that has an outside chance of being in the debates, which is his only chance to probably attract any kind of meaningful support. To be involved in the national debates, you need 15% on the average of the last 5 national polls, reputable polls. So we won't know until closer to September, into September, whether or not Johnson makes the debate. But there is a Green Party candidate, a Harvard-trained physician named Jill Stein. It looks like Stein hurts, as you might expect, Green Party, the Democratic candidate, and the Libertarian candidate would hurt, right, Trump and the Republicans more. So as it now stands, we're just going to have to wait and see how it all plays out. I mean, no one can predict with any certainty what's likely to happen. Now let me talk about our state for a minute. I think Pennsylvania has a good chance of being competitive this year. Other than Obama's 10-point victory in 2008, the races have all been fairly close. For example, the president won re-election by 5 points in our state, carried our state. John Kerry in 2004 carried the state by 2.5 points. Al Gore carried it by 4. The key to our state lies in several different regions. One of the things that Sanders won, and won handily, over Hillary, and Trump did very well, were white blue-collar workers, particularly those who live in certain portions of our state, out in the Southwest, in those counties surrounding Allegheny, places like Washington and Fayette and Cambria and Beaver and I said Washington, Greene, where steel and coal were kings, and now they're gone, or they're greatly changed. Where the folks out there feel that the recession's not over, where many of them have not gotten raises, where once the kids go to college, if they go to college, they don't come home, there are no jobs. There's a big brain drain. This is the group of voters that Sanders really appealed to on the Democratic side. They want more government action to help them. On the Republican side, it has a little different context to it. They will be key to Trump, any Trump victory. Now, Romney carried all those counties. Every one of those ones that I mentioned have a Democratic registration. But Romney won all of them. The question is, can Trump win them can he win them, but by how much? And what's the turnout? The other key region of the state will be the Philly suburbs, Bucks, Chester, Montgomery, and Delaware. That's where the largest number of you folks live. The independent, you may be registered in one party or another. Swing voters, you could go Democratic or Republican. You're big. You have a lot of voters, and you often tip the scale because you'll go, with the winner and give the winner the edge. So we'll watch that. But here's something else, right where we are, South Central PA. The Republican vote in South Central PA slipped over the last decade. And so, in order for the Republicans to win, the Republican candidates are going to have to do better in South Central Pennsylvania than we've seen in the last several elections. In fact, Dauphin County is now pretty reliably Democratic in big elections. Still have a lot of local elected Republicans. So South Central Pennsylvania will be important as well. For Clinton, we have the opposite. Hillary Clinton must win a large percentage of the African American vote. 13% of our voters in Pennsylvania are African Americans. Half of them live in one city. Obama won 93% of the African American vote. And by the way, I'm glad you see it. We had a first in 2012 that's not widely known. Proportion to their total numbers, more African Americans voted than whites for the first time in the history of our country. So Obama wins 93% of a turnout that's above 73%. You get it? So for Clinton to win, not just our state, but states like Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, states with large proportions of African Americans as well as Hispanics, she's going to have to be sure the vote doesn't slip. And no one can argue that there's a lot of enthusiasm for her, even among her own supporters. That's one of the things she has lacked during the course of the campaign, that she did not excite voters. Not just because they don't trust her and she's viewed as dishonest by a majority of the American electorate, but largely because she's just not that kind of a personality. And so we'll see if she can excite the minorities, particularly in those swing states. The Hispanic vote in our state is relatively small, 3, 4, 5%, not likely to make as big a difference as the African American vote. So overall, we're going to have to sit around and figure out, who's doing well in what parts of the state. We'll do our first poll at F&M. I'll release it Thursday after the Democratic Convention. So we'll try to gauge in our state if the convention and what goes on there has actually influenced vote choice. All right, let me now turn to another race, and then we can do some questions. I want to talk about the U.S. Senate race. This was alluded to. Pat Toomey is seeking election to a second term. Senator Toomey has led every single poll. You hear what I just said? Every single poll that's been done. His opponent is a woman named Katie McGinty. She ran for governor, a primary in which obviously Tom Wolf won the primary handily, by the way, and then went on to win the governorship of the state by 10 points. McGinty's career has largely been as a bureaucrat. I'm not using that in a negative way. She worked for Al Gore, for Bill Clinton, and then she was a DEP, Department of Environmental Protection Secretary during the year when Ed Riddell was governor, and then obviously served as chief of staff to Governor Wolf for about 6 months. So she doesn't have the vote, she doesn't have the kind of record, that's easily accessible. Senator Toomey, on the other hand, has 3 terms in Congress, president of the Club for Growth, and now completing his first full term as a member of the Senate. He's been a reliable conservative in the Senate. But here's something different, and I'm independent on this. Here's something different about Pat Toomey. Unlike another guy named Rick Santorum, no one would ever accuse Toomey of being provocative. No one would ever say that, is he good here? Yes. You've heard him speak, so you know what I mean. He chooses his words very carefully. He's not boisterous, he's not bombastic, he's not flamboyant. And in many respects, that's worked to his favor. It comes across as thoughtful, well-mannered, and a little bit in a sense like a Democrat, Bob Casey. Some call him bland, and we can go into all those other descriptions, but neither of them are given to the kind of hyperbole that we've seen out of a former senator we had here, Rick Santorum. You could go through other members of Congress if you want. So the point I'm trying to make here is that Senator Toomey seems well positioned to win, and on a number of issues he's certainly been in the center, such as federal universal background check on guns, which the press went crazy over, and I said, so what? You know why? Because in 1995, the Pennsylvania legislature passed a universal background check in our own state that was supported by the NRA. It's not all that dissimilar from the Toomey-Manchin bill. So Toomey, I don't think, was having the biggest limb as everybody thought, because it had been in place in Pennsylvania, and hunters, were living with it. People who used, shotgun, whatever they did with weapons, they were okay with it. And he comes across as a kind of modern image, but here's the danger. And this is, if I said anything today that you remember, you might not. It's all right. Here's one thing. When Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States in 1984, right here, 1/2 of you, you're no longer Democrats. 1/2 of you voted for the president of one party and a member of Congress from the other party. You hear what I just said? In 2012, only 1 of every 5 of you did that. We have seen a dramatic rise in straight party voting. Why? Polarization. Remember? I'm back to that theme. The polarization, the hostility towards people in the other party. So Toomey's biggest concern, in my humble judgment, has to be, this is a hypothetical, Secretary Clinton winning our state by 8 points. Carries down ballot. Maybe not in gerrymandered congressional district, but you can't gerrymander a state. At least not the last time I looked. I'm talking about a U.S. Senate race. So in some respects, Toomey's biggest fear is that he gets swept out in a way Now I want to go to something else as an analogy. Remember I said 2012? You know what happened in the state of Pennsylvania for the first time in 40 years in 2012? The Democrats won every single statewide office. Who won? Bob Casey won by 9. Obama won by 5. I hate to mention this. A certain Attorney General by 13. 13 points. You all know her. I'm not mentioning her name. I refuse to go there on the grounds that I might have to be honest about it. But you get the point. Wait a minute. Who else won? Another guy from York? Really? The Auditor General of the state treasurer, and the Attorney General. They won every office. See where I'm heading with this? So a wave in either way, in either direction, and more often in presidential elections, it favors the D's. Why? Because you get a larger turnout of African Americans, you get a larger turnout of other minorities, and you get a larger turnout of the millennials that typically, turnout would be very low. Millennials, 42% of millennials turned out by age group, the lowest of any of the various age groups, baby boomers being the highest, but they were only 17% of the vote. And in our state, they're slightly less because we have the fourth oldest population in the country. So when you think about it in that context, the real fear that I think a candidate has to have on the ballot is you get swept out, you follow me, by this dramatic uptick in straight party voting. And we'll just have to wait and see. In the congressional districts, I don't see, there's only one congressional district in Bucks County, the 8th, where Republicans are retiring. It looks like there's any possibility of an upset, largely because of artful and sometimes legal gerrymandering. Those districts are all fairly safe. So why don't I don't have a clue how long I talked, I don't care. We can do questions, I can go home. Go ahead. 5 minutes. See, I talked too long. Go ahead,
When John McCain picked a running mate, his choice turned out to be very counterproductive for him. So who do you think of the current presidential candidates? Who are they going to choose for running mates? And why would they choose that person?
Okay. Well, the question has to do with vice presidential running mates. The question also threw in Sarah Palin without mentioning her. The fact of the matter is that Sarah Palin did not defeat John McCain. You understand? There's very little history that the selection of a vice president influences the outcome of the Electoral College. The only selection of a vice president in modern history that made a difference was Kennedy's selection of Lyndon Johnson in 1960, and that's only because Johnson was able to deliver 4 southern states. One of them was Texas, which many historians argue he didn't exactly do it legally, but that's another thing. We don't need to go there. So I think overall, they can probably hurt you a little more than they can help you. But the press is bored now. The media is bored. Because the nominees are wrapped up. What's the next big question? The running mate, right? Did anybody think, well, I'm voting for Barack Obama because Joe Biden's on the ticket? Is that a thought process? And I'm not saying this because I don't like Senator Biden or Vice President Biden. I'm saying it because it's not a thought process that people go through. So typically, here's what you do. You're a president and you come from somewhere. I'm Jimmy Carter. I come from Georgia. I served 1 term as governor, right? I'm now the nominee of my party. So, well, wait a minute. I have no foreign policy experience. I have no congressional experience. So why not pick a senator? Walter Mondale. You with me? George Bush, 43. Governor of what state? Texas. Who's he picked? Dick Cheney. Why? See where I'm heading? Well, wait a minute. Let's go before him. Ronald Reagan. Governor of California, actor. Any experience in Congress at all? No. So who does he pick? Bush 41. Foreign intelligence, you get it? So what you typically try to do is shore up a weakness that you have. You with me on that? Even Obama did it. Why did he pick Biden? Because of his experience as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The president was only in office 2 years as a senator before he went on that, you know what I mean? He went to Biden because he was worried about winning all 3 electoral votes in Delaware? I don't think so. I don't think that came into play. He picked them, you know, and sometimes you even want to be compatible with them. So I don't have a clue. I mean, Governor Pence from Indiana is sort of the rage of the moment on the Republican side. Here's a guy who's in the House. He's in his first term. He's conservative. But how does that help Trump with Congress? I thought he might pick one of the more conservative senators if he can find someone to go on the ticket with him. That's the other problem that he has. So lastly on this, vice presidents throughout American history have been irrelevant. They go to state funerals and they show up every now and then in the Senate if there's a tie vote. In 1976, when Carter picked Mondale, we have the beginning of the modern vice presidents, where the vice president really mattered. They became very much involved in the decisions, in the formulation of policy, virtually everyone. Mondale was hugely influential in foreign policy. And you go through, but look at how close Biden and the president are. They are very, very close. And I'm sure the president and, you know, oh, you know who, how about this one? You know who Bill Clinton's closest advisors were? Al Gore, his vice president. You know who else? Hillary Rodham Clinton. The 2 of them were the President Clinton's closest advisors. But we'll make a big deal of it, and in the end, I don't think, you don't want them to hurt you. You don't want them to have to go through some investigation into their background. Presumably they haven't lied to Congress. That was a joke. Anybody else? I guess you're going to kick me out. Yes, ma'am.
It seems like partisan politics have gotten a lot worse since the TV and radio stations have had their
Yeah, great
rules
point.
lifted, and they've gone from one end to the next. Do you feel that's had an impact?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I don't have a lot of time, but I'll tell you something that's going on that's disturbing to me as a professor and something that I'm always arguing against. People come to me and say, what do you watch? Well, I say, well, I'll watch Chris Matthews, and then I'll watch Bill O'Reilly. What the hell are you doing? Chris Matthews and then Bill O'Reilly, you crazy? No. I feel an obligation that I got to hear both sides in order to understand it. So essentially, and you're onto something, what's going on is people in America today only read, listen to, and watch shows that support their preconceived notions of things. So you don't hear the other side. You're not, oh, see, I'm stuck in the middle with you. You understand that song? You do it. You do that every day. So, and then you have the social media, which compounds it, and the fact that a conservative reading the New York Times, I don't think so. A liberal reading the editorial page of what paper? The Wall Street Journal, not in this day and age. You get the point. And so that just reinforces it and makes it worse. It compounds the ideological divisions and it shrinks the middle. How many more are we doing here? One more. Go ahead back there. Quickly, I'm keeping you here, sorry.
On the Republican side especially, can you explain or help me understand, you've talked about the uber conservative and the uber liberal, we divided up the room. One of the things that I still kind of grapple with Trump is, from a policy standpoint, this is not a conservative candidate. And yet you have this remarkable sweep, which in a sense to me doesn't quite fit the model that you talked about of the extremes of the party. I don't think you have that on the Democratic side because frankly you really have a centrist nominee for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk on the Democratic side. I mean, look what the race did to Hillary. It pushed her dramatically to the left. I think that's not arguable. I mean, she even made at one point about a single payer, which she's opposed to. You folks in healthcare will love this. She now says, well, you know, we could take Medicare and reduce the age to 55 or 50. Well, if you want to get a single payer system, You could just take Medicare and apply it to everybody, right? Don't we have a single payer? We do that? Of course we do. And so she's moved dramatically to the left in order to win, you know, in order to help win the nomination because of the polarization.
Doesn't mean she'll govern from the left, though.
Yeah, but on the Republican side, I think what trumps, excuse the expression, what trumps the ideology is this angst and anger that the voters have, Republican voters have at their own party. Remember how these anti-establishment candidates did. You know, from Carly Fiorina to Ben Carson, and I don't know, Marco Rubio, kind of a semi-anti-establishment candidate. I actually thought he would be the nominee. And I normally don't do this, but just in terms of the tactics, I support him, but I thought he would be the strongest candidate for the Republicans in the fall, just, you know, in terms of demographic groups and issues and experience. But you have to remember, you have to go back to this angst and anger and frustration that I talked about, which overrules these issues. Because we've interviewed Trump voters, and they're staunch conservatives, some of them. They don't care. Because the time has come to take back the party, you follow me? To take back the government. That's more important than it is to be consistent on these issues. At any rate, thanks for having me, and have a great summer.